Good morning. In a queue at the supermarket, a woman in her late 80s was told by the cashier, you really should bring your own shopping bags when you come because plastic bags are not good for the environment. The embarrassed elderly woman apologized profusely. She said, "I am so sorry, but when I was a child, we didn't have the environmental issue." The cashier answered rather rudely, "Well, that's our problem today, isn't it? Your generation did not care enough for our environment." Indeed, for our older generation, the environment wasn't such an issue in their day. Back then, they returned milk bottles and beer bottles to the shop or the off-license. They sent them back to be re-washed, sterilised, refilled and reused. The same bottles were used over and over. Bottles were not made of plastic and didn't need recycling. People walked to the local shops and didn't climb into a 300 horsepower machine every time they needed to go to the supermarket. They brought their fruit and veg loose, not prepackaged. They didn't have to throw away bins full of plastic and foam and paper packaging that need huge recycling plants to process them. Kids got hand-me-down clothes from their brothers or sisters. They didn't buy brand new clothes that had been shipped from the other side of the planet. Back then, they washed their babies' nappies because they didn't use the disposable kind. They dried clothes out in the garden, not in an energy-gobbling machine. Back then, nature's wind and solar power really did dry the clothes. Back then, shops repaired goods with strange things called spare parts. They didn't throw the whole item away just because one part of it failed. Families made do with one TV or even radio in the house, not a TV in every single room. And the TV had a screen the size of a handkerchief rather than one the size of Wales. Most rooms only had one electrical socket rather than an entire bank of sockets to power numerous appliances all at once. In the kitchen, women blended and stirred and mixed by hand because there weren't machines to do everything for you. People exercised by working. They didn't need to go to brightly lit, air-conditioned health clubs to run on treadmills that operate on electricity. They refilled fountain pens. They didn't have to buy new plastic ones every time. They replaced blades in a razor rather than throwing away a plastic one just because the blade got dull. Back then, people took the bus and children rode their bikes to school or walked instead of turning their parents into 24-hour taxi services. And they didn't need a computerized gadget to receive a signal beamed from satellites thousands of miles out in space in order to find the nearest chip shop. For that elderly lady, the environmental issue hadn't been a thing when she was young. June the 5th is World Environment Day. The Bible tells me, as you sow, so shall you reap. Whilst COVID-19 has brought devastation to the lives of many, the effects on our environment have been positive. CO2 emissions and human mobility has been reduced, which in turn has improved air quality and encouraged the resurgence of a number of animal species. So what lessons can we learn? What lessons do the pandemic provide in regard to the environmental issue? Can this season offer us a turning point in our care for the planet? There are many small steps that each one of us can choose to make if we really care about the environment. Maybe just one of those might be to lobby or even boycott global mega companies who make millions out of the practice of planned obsolescence for the plethora of electronic goods that we have so come to rely on. The Bible says, as you sow, so shall you reap. Sadly, progress has not reaped well for our environment. Whatever decisions you make today will affect the consequences that we all reap in the future. Thanks for joining me.